In Brazil, leaders talk next steps in the climate change fight. In Jakarta, the rising sea is already wreaking havoc.
People's homes are sinking into the ground. I'm next to a doorframe, and the top of the doorframe is dead level to my chest.
I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Today, life in a sinking city. Also, bomb blasts in Delhi and Islamabad have people there worried.
Attacks like this can very easily escalate tensions in the region.
Plus, why being multilingual is a great brain workout.
When you are talking multiple languages and you want to speak in one of those languages, you need to control the other ones.
It also affects how we age.
And tired of Spotify?
Wow, it's going to be so funny if we release our song through Craigslist.
That's all ahead on The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Thank you for joining us today.
Many cities by the sea are sinking. Heavy roads and buildings compress the soft earth below them.
At the same time, climate change is causing sea levels to rise. Entire neighborhoods risk going underwater.
In the Indonesian capital of Jakarta, home to 30 million people, the need to adapt is urgent. Reporter Patrick Wynn begins today's show with our story from Jakarta.
Life gets pretty shaky in this part of Jakarta. The sea has swallowed the land, so the residents have to live above it on flimsy platforms made of bamboo. When they walk, it squeaks and groans. And if someone trips, they could plunge into the water below. It's a long drop. This isn't a typical way to live in Jakarta. Most people live in houses or condos in much safer areas. But this neighborhood, where people fish for a living, is on the front lines of a city facing a crisis created by sinking and climate change. One resident is Husnin, a 67-year-old shopkeeper who goes by one name. He says our entire neighborhood sits on bamboo poles.
Ini pancang tiang bambu. Dari bambu itu kita pancang-pancang.
Husnin sells sodas and snacks from his home, a rickety wooden structure. Like other houses here, it's built on top of this shaky platform, made not just from bamboo, but scraps of wood and chunks of styrofoam. The water below rises and falls with the tide. Some days, it's almost lapping at their floors.
Kalau pasang ya biasanya kan nama juga ini kan air laut nih.
Husnin says they're used to it. Tide comes in, tide comes out. This place is a vision of the future, of humans adapting to rising oceans and sinking cities. Jakarta is sinking fast, 10 inches a year in some parts of town. And in this neighborhood in northern Jakarta, kids grow up thinking it's normal to live on a creaky platform, playing just inches from its edge. It's not easy to live like this. Take something basic, like fresh water. It's not feasible to install plumbing in a neighborhood hovering over the sea, so if you're thirsty or need a bath, you gotta call a guy named Arta Suhara, a 51-year-old with a fuzzy gray beard and arms covered in prison tattoos. He is the water man.
Kalau masyarakat sini memakai air bersih itu satu untuk masak, kedua untuk minum.
Water for cooking, drinking, washing up, Arta says it all runs through him. Here's how it works. Residents will call Arta. He'll leave his house and amble over with a cigarette dangling from his lips and a big rubber hose over his shoulder. Residents greet him outside their shanty home with a plastic bucket, and he'll stick that hose inside. Now, the far end of this long hose is back at Arta's house, hooked to a pump and a water tank that his family controls. He'll call up one of his family members and tell them, go ahead, turn on the pump. And voila, at the other end, out gushes water into someone's bucket. Arta charges about 50 cents per bucket. That's expensive around here. So I ask Arta, why do people put up with this? Why don't they move?
Ya kan Jakarta itu lebih nyaman daripada di kampung.
Arta says, look, this is still better than living in the countryside, farming rice, which is even harder. Jakarta is where the action is, the money, the jobs. And yet, some projections show that by 2050, more than a third of this city will be underwater. With rising threats from climate change, many coastal megacities are facing this problem too. In Indonesia, the government has decided to do something big, to build a gigantic wall in the sea.
So if you do it right, a seawall can have huge benefits.
Victor Konen is a Dutch engineer. He's been living in Indonesia for more than 4 decades. The firm he works for, Witteveen and Boss, was chosen by the government to design that seawall. For now, the plan is to lay down a 20 to 30-mile wall. Jakarta sits on a bay, and the seawall, shaped like a crescent, would more or less seal it off from the ocean. Konen says building it is not as hard as it sounds. They could do it in about 5 to 8 years.
You can build such a seawall for Jakarta, which is 50 kilometers, in let's say 5 to 8 years. The problem is more the impact of such a seawall. So you can build it in a few years' time, but if you don't do it right, you are repairing all the impacts for decades.
Yeah, Jakarta sits on one of the most crowded islands on Earth, Java. Several rivers run through the island, picking up waste and trash, and then dumping it all into the bay off Jakarta's coast. So, wall off the sea, Konen says, and the bay will become a cesspool of filth.
And these rivers are heavily polluted, so you won't have a blue lagoon, you have a black lagoon.
The government is cleaning up the rivers, but it's not happening fast. And yet, Indonesia's president, Prabowo Subianto, is gung-ho to build this wall. He's even pushing for a bigger seawall, more than 300 miles long, to make sure Jakarta and all the towns and cities around it are truly safe once and for all. Jakarta does have some experience building seawalls. More than 20 years ago, it started putting up smaller ones closer to shore. I visited a part of Jakarta where people live in the shadow of a wall.
I'm walking down this narrow little street, and you can actually see where people's homes are sinking into the ground. I'm next to a door frame, and the top of the door frame is dead level to my chest.
This neighborhood is more than 6 feet below sea level, and it is a little unnerving, knowing a slender strip of concrete is all that holds the ocean back. It's even more scary when you hear stories from the locals.
Saya lagi bangun tidur, habis sarapan tuh bangun tidur.
A man named Mohammed Diosaputro is telling me about a morning 18 years ago when he was just 9 years old. He woke up hungry, hopped out of bed, walked to the noodle shop outside across from the wall, and then, before he could even finish his noodles, out of nowhere, there was a deafening crack and a biblical wave crashing down on him. Part of the wall had collapsed.
Kayak tsunami aja begitulah.
He says it was like a tsunami. Mohammed grabbed onto a nearby pole so he wouldn't get washed away. Then he heard a woman scream, "My baby, my baby." A toddler was flailing in the water, so Mohammed reached out, grabbed the kid, and hugged him tightly against the pole. Mohammed yelled to the mother, "I've got your boy, run, save yourself." Mohammed and the 2-year-old were rescued by police in a rubber boat. When the waters receded, he saw that half his house was gone. The wall was later patched up, and the lesson Mohammed takes from this isn't walls are useless. It's that protecting this city will be hard. Mohammed is a fisherman now, and a giant wall in the ocean could wreak havoc on his livelihood. But he is still eager to see it appear on the horizon.
Nggak jadi, nggak bakalan deh. Nggak ada yang bisa gantiin Jakarta. Nggak ada yang bisa keluar dari Jakarta kayaknya.
Look, nothing can replace Jakarta, Mohammed says. Everyone has to come here to earn a living. So officials better start saving this city. On my way out of Mohammed's house, stooping under his sunken door frame and stepping into the street, I noticed something strange. A wet patch at the base of the wall. There was a trickle of seawater leaking into the street through a hole in that seawall. For The World, I'm Patrick Nguyen, Jakarta, Indonesia.
Stay with The World for more reporting on climate change and news from the COP30 Climate Summit underway this week and next in Brazil.
Turning now to the UK and what has been described as the single biggest seizure ever of cryptocurrency. That's according to UK law enforcement officials. We're talking more than $6 billion in Bitcoin. British police apprehended the Chinese businesswoman who'd been sitting on the massive stash after she'd evaded them for years. Today, a court in London sentenced her to nearly 12 years in prison on money laundering charges. The World's Matthew Bell reports.
Qian Zhimin ran a massive Ponzi scheme in China. Starting in 2014, she reportedly bilked tens of thousands of investors, many of them retirees, with promises of big returns on crypto mining. The BBC's Tony Han tracked down a Chinese man who says he made the mistake of putting his money into Qian's company. Here's the man speaking through an interpreter.
These were the Bitcoin mines.
An investor we're calling Mr. Yu says the company drip-fed him apparent earnings just over £10 every working day.
That made everyone feel good. It even gave us the confidence to borrow more to invest.
Prosecutors in the UK say ultimately 128,000 people were defrauded in the scheme. By mid-2017, Chinese police launched an investigation into Qian's activities. That's when she fled to Britain on a fake passport. Posing as an antiques and jewelry dealer, Qian rented a house in the upscale London neighborhood of Hampstead for more than $22,000 a month. She'd converted her illicitly obtained wealth into Bitcoin. But turning that cryptocurrency into cash to support a luxury lifestyle eventually drew the attention of British police. They raided Qian's house in 2018. This is from police body cam footage.
Hello, madam. Appreciate you're in bed. I've just got to record down your name, if that is all right. So what's your first name, please?
Yadi Zhang.
That's an alias Qian was using. Detective Joe Ryan told the BBC what police found that day.
Very large house, fairly messy, and there was cash almost everywhere. Thousands of pounds, bundles of £20,000 here, £12,000 there, envelopes with money in. There was even a coat hanging up in a cupboard that had £3,000 in the pocket.
Ryan says he now realizes that he was wrong about Qian because at the time he thought this woman was not very bright.
Years later, knowing a lot more about her, that was an act, and she's very good at acting.
After the raid, Qian faced legal scrutiny. She was never convicted of anything, however, and for more than 5 years she eluded the police. She and an accomplice continued to deal with the challenge of converting Bitcoin into cash. It took until 2021, but investigators say they were finally able to unlock digital storage devices seized during that 2018 raid. That's when they realized just how much crypto Qian had accumulated, a total of 61,000 Bitcoin. In April 2024, police caught up with Qian and she was arrested in the English city of York. In court this September, Qian pleaded guilty to charges of money laundering. Now she's going to prison. But the story is not over because it's not clear what happens with all that Bitcoin seized by British authorities. Thousands of victims in China want their money back. This is now part of a new legal case for British courts. They will need to determine who deserves compensation and how much, because the value of Bitcoin has skyrocketed since they first made those investments. For The World, I'm Matthew Bell.
The rivalry between China and the U.S. is ratcheting up, with Africa emerging as one of the clearest backdrops of that competition. Both countries have been funneling billions of dollars in foreign direct investment into the continent, and for the first time in a decade, the U.S. has surpassed China in those investments. But it is a complicated picture for the African countries caught in the middle. Lina Ben Abdallah is a professor of international affairs at Wake Forest University and a research associate at the China-Africa Research Initiative. She described for us the focus of U.S. investments.
It is very much narrow focus of U.S. investment in actually mainly one sector. And this sector is critical mineral deposits. And it's a sector of essentially mineral resources and extractions. And so we know that Africa has about 30% of the world's total critical mineral deposits. It's a very rich continent when it comes to these resources. And because of this geopolitical rivalry between the US and China, we have seen the US essentially go to African countries to source its critical minerals in order to kind of keep up with the energy demands for its rivalry with China. So we have to understand sort of where these investments are going. And when we look at China, yes, we are saying the numbers in the US has surpassed China since 2012. But actually, when you look at what kind of investments Chinese companies are bringing into the continent, we see a much more diverse picture. We see investments in the agro-tech business, in the agriculture business, in infrastructure investments. A whole bunch of diverse sectors are benefiting from Chinese investments rather than focusing everything on one main sector, which is the case of U.S. investments in Africa.
So are you saying that even though China is not as deeply invested as American companies in the African continent right now, they're doing it smarter?
I think so. I think on the long term, it's also much more holistic approach. It's much better than when you focus everything, the whole put in the proverbial sort of eggs in one basket type of thing. And honestly, even these investments in critical minerals, we haven't seen a lot of capacity building. We haven't seen US companies process these minerals in Africa, for instance. A lot of this is exporting minerals, which means extracting these minerals from the African continent and taking them to Pennsylvania, taking them outside, generally for processing. And so from an African perspective, what that does is it just drains your minerals, it drains your resources without leaving behind investments that are going to allow you and enable you to perhaps process your minerals at some later point individually or independently of other investors that are coming from the outside. It's not leaving factories or processing facilities or trainings for people to actually do this on their own. What this amounts to at the end of the day, when it's just kind of, exporting these critical minerals, it amounts to essentially dependency rather than real investment that has sustainable long-term future.
You mentioned something there that I picked up on, and that is taking stuff to Pennsylvania for processing, which is in fact what is happening with one company that's invested in tungsten in Rwanda, I've read. So is that kind of the typical example that you're referring to?
Yes, that is the typical example. And of course, if you think about it as critical minerals, if you develop them, right, if you develop them into products that you can sell in the market, you can gain a lot more value as you develop these critical minerals, as they become something more expensive. But when you sell them at their very raw state, you're not building value. You're just exporting critical minerals instead of exporting oil or other, fossil fuels, which was essentially the story of African economy in the 19th century, exporting them to Europe and then to China and then to other actors. So it's not really changing the heart of the narrative.
What are we hearing on this from leaders in African countries or businesses there about this trend?
There's a mix of reactions that we see from this on the African continent. On the one hand, great that we are seeing U.S. companies kind of reigniting interest in the continent and creating for some players some sense of competition, because when you have rivalry, when you have more demand for your supply, the value of your supply goes up. So there's a level of excitement there about the possibility of potentially renegotiating, for instance, contracts that were essentially kind of given to China because China was the only player in town. Now, when you have competition from U.S. companies, you can go back and renegotiate. You can ask for more. But there is the other reality that says, well, in the end of the day, is this really creating wealth for all the Africans in these countries involved? Or is this something for a few companies or few elites? Are we just diversifying our dependence from China to other actors or from Europe to other actors? And you see both perceptions depending on sort of who you're asking and what their positionality is vis-a-vis the governments and the companies that are benefiting from these products.
I mean, it's obviously different from country to country. Earlier this year, the president of Gabon urged the U.S. to invest in Africa, saying that if the U.S. did not invest, other countries would. How do you read that? Is that a form of leverage?
That's correct. It is also a form of pragmatism to say that African countries are basically trying to not take sides in this broad kind of global rivalry between the U.S. and China. There has been a lot of proactive statements from African leaders to say we are open for business. We don't have anything that tie us ideologically or automatically to this country or to the other. We're open for business with however many partners that are interested in doing business with us.
Lena, how is China watching what the U.S. does, and how is China gauging what to do next when it comes to keeping the U.S. in check?
I don't think that this is alarming to China, because we know that there are so many more Chinese companies operating in the African continent than there are Americans. And we know that they have built so much social capital, so much power in the continent on the ground. They have built so many connections, so many networks, that they know they can basically move and shift from one sector to the other. You know, the bigger picture is that Africa only gets 3.5% of global FDI. So right. Chinese investments have never really been super big going into Africa anyway. And so it's not this really big kind of panic moment for China.
Lena, you've been describing resource-rich countries in Africa and superpowers like the U.S. and China making deals to extract resources there. I mean, it's a very colonial 19th century paradigm, as you said. What will change the power dynamic in Africa's favor?
I think it's imperative for African countries to think about their development plans, national strategies. They have to have national priorities. These investments need to lead to more investments. These investments need to lead to more opportunities, job growth, skills, capacity building skills, technology transfers. We are in an age of AI. It's an age that is requiring a whole bunch of infrastructure, some of it physical, some of it soft, some of it digital. And I think African countries just need to take advantage of these critical mineral resources and this high demand in these resources to put the future development of their countries in the center of these negotiations. This should not just be looked at as income for the government. It should be looked at as an opportunity to actually build domestic capacity for industries, for creating opportunities domestically, economically for African people.
Lena Ben Abdallah is a professor at Wake Forest University and a researcher at Johns Hopkins. Bomb blasts have rocked two of the capital cities on the Asian subcontinent. A suicide bombing today in Islamabad, Pakistan, took 12 lives. That came a day after an explosion in the Indian capital of Delhi that killed 8 people. The attacks have put the region on edge because they could escalate tensions between the two rival nations. Reporter Sushmita Pathak has been tracking the developments. She joined us today from just outside New York City.
The blast in Delhi happened in a very busy part of the city, near the iconic Red Fort. This is a 17th century fort, a very popular tourist spot. This is also where the Prime Minister addresses the nation every year on Independence Day. And I've been there several times, and it's a very busy place, always crowded. It's also near a huge market called Chandni Chowk. And so on Monday evening, just before 7 p.m., a car bomb went off at a traffic light near the fort's entrance. This is also near a metro station. And immediately after, there was a huge fire. I've been seeing videos of the aftermath, and you can see just, a lot of vehicles nearby also caught fire. There's a lot of twisted metal, broken glass, and debris on the street. 8 people have been killed, and several others were also injured.
Do we know who was behind this attack?
So that is still not clear. No one has claimed responsibility for this attack. Indian police are investigating it as a possible terror attack. They're looking at who the owner of the car is and trying to trace back who the people in the car were when the bomb went off. What's interesting is that on Monday, hours before the bomb went off, police in Delhi's neighboring state recovered almost 800 pounds of ammonium nitrate. This is a chemical used to make bombs, and they confiscated it and other weapons from a location very close to Delhi. And police are now looking into whether these two incidents could have been related.
So then today, Sushmita, there was a deadly suicide bombing in the capital of neighboring Pakistan. What happened there?
Yes, so in Islamabad, a suicide bomber targeted a court complex. The bomb went off outside the court gates. Pakistan's interior minister has said that the bomber actually tried to enter the court but could not, and so they instead targeted a police vehicle that was parked outside and detonated the bomb near it. That attack killed 12 people and also injured several others, and this happened Tuesday afternoon local time. We have much more clarity about who was behind this attack. A breakaway faction of the Pakistani Taliban has claimed responsibility, but Pakistan's government is also blaming Afghanistan, the Afghan Taliban specifically, and India for the attack. The Pakistan Prime Minister's office posted on the platform X earlier today, accusing India of instigating the terrorists. He didn't offer any evidence to support this.
Well, at the very least, it seems there are tense feelings between Pakistan and India right now. What could all this lead to?
This could potentially escalate tensions between the two countries. India and Pakistan are bitter rivals. They've engaged in conflict several times, and they often blame each other for terror attacks. It's a very delicate situation right now, and we'll have to see what happens. But attacks like this can very easily escalate tensions in the region.
Delhi and Islamabad, though, have both been relatively peaceful in recent years. Have these attacks come as a shock?
Yes, they have come as a shock. There was a time in the 90s and the 2000s when these kind of bombings were pretty common in several parts of India. I remember, I was in school in 2006 in Mumbai, and there were these series of bombings on the Mumbai train system, on the Mumbai commuter trains. And that really, I can remember the feeling of terror that myself and my family and everyone else in the country felt because of these attacks. And we used to have that kind of a thing, almost every couple of years. But over the last decade and a half, things have been quiet in Indian cities. Terror attacks, suicide bombings have mostly occurred in the Kashmir region or in more remote parts. Even Islamabad hasn't been hit by bombings very frequently in recent years. So this has come as a shock. People are scared. They don't feel safe in their own cities. All major cities in India are on alert right now.
Sushmita, has there been any suggestion that these two bombings are connected, the one in Islamabad, the one in Delhi?
I think it's still very early to say whether these two attacks were related in any way. I think we'll have to wait and see what the police in both countries find. But it is significant that they happened, just a day apart.
Reporter Sushmita Pathak, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Marco.
Turning our attention now to the Peruvian Andes to hear about a food staple that is nearly universal, the potato. Right now, potatoes in Peru are at high risk for late blight, a disease that can wipe out entire potato crops. Scientists have been working to breed a new kind of potato that's resistant to late blight. Tiago Mendez of the International Potato Center in Lima helped develop the new spud. He joined us for The Big Fix, our reporting project about meeting the challenges of climate change. Speaking with me from Nairobi, Kenya, Mendez explained what's causing the disease to spread.
The climate change, it's bringing a lot of problems. So in the case of the highlands of Peru, it's kind of getting warm, but also a bit more humidity. And therefore, that's late blight. It's just like increasing, and farmers are having more challenge on controlling it. Some places, they are just getting higher and higher.
Higher and higher altitude, like higher into the mountains?
Higher into the mountains, yeah. And the reason is because in places where they were not having late blight issue, they are now having. So therefore going higher, so reduce the pressure of late blight.
And it's been spreading further into the Andes as well, right?
Yeah, and because of this condition, it's keep changing. Also, the pathogen, it's keep evolving with the environment. And of course, other issues related to monocropping, it's increasing the challenging for farmers to control this disease.
What's causing this to happen now?
No, in fact, the late blight is always there, either in the Andes or globally. It was always a problem. The fact is that it's keep changing, right? The pathogen is evolving, so it's kind of affecting varieties that were not affecting before. But this is like an evolving situation. And this is like a long process. In the case of this particular variety, it's taking us like around 15 years to get where we are today.
So as to this new potato you and the International Potato Center in Peru have developed, have any of the potatoes actually been planted yet in Peru?
Oh, yeah. So we have already for the last 2 years distributed seed to over 700 farmers in the Andes in the 2 locations that we've been testing those varieties.
You're in Kenya, as I said earlier. How would this newly developed variety help Kenyan potato farmers or even wider globally?
Late blight in the highlands of Kenya is a huge issue here. So what we did actually, this particular variety, Sip acidic, and another one that we released before called Sip Matilde, we use it as a patent and you cross them into local potato varieties that we have developed here in Kenya and in the East Africa. And we are now selecting the offsprings of these crosses. And just in Kenya, we are talking about over 500,000 farmers growing potato.
Wow, that is a lot. So SIP, that's the acronym for the International Potato Center in Peru, and you represent them. It's my understanding, Tiago, that Peru is the genetic source of all the world's potato varieties. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're right. So everything starts from there, right? So we have this Lake Titicaca region, which is in the southern part of Peru, connecting to Bolivia. That's where we believe everything starts in terms of diversity. And the International Potato Center, we have the largest gene bank, preserving the largest diversity of potato globally. And of course, this is like a gene bank or collection that it's available for the humanity. And from there, we collaborate with many universities, many international centers working on like one potato. And it's an important thing that we do there.
Is it a point of pride for Peru that it's, the mother lode of potatoes?
Oh, certainly. So this is like very important for Peru. Like, a few years ago when I joined CIP 2018, I was there for the first time. The World Potato Congress was happening in Peru, and we were in Cusco. And they're extremely proud about that. So we have a series of like projects like we do with local farmers. Some farmers, they grow more than 30 different types of potato, even more. And there are several other projects that CIP is engaging on getting some of those materials, clean them up, because some of them has like a lot of issues with virus. We clean and then we do what we call repatriation. This is done from the gene bank. We also have like colleagues working in the highlands documenting in collaboration with the ministers like agriculture and other ministers there, in documenting all this diversity. There is a series of books, mapping and cataloging all this diversity in the Andes. They're certainly, very proud of this diversity and how this diversity is serving the world. Yeah?
Tiago Mendez joined us from Nairobi, Kenya. He's a plant breeder for the International Potato Center in Peru.
If you have been slacking on your Duolingo, here's some motivation to get back on track. New research suggests that learning at least a second language could play a role in keeping our minds healthier for longer. A study published in the journal Nature Aging found a link between speaking 2 or more languages and delayed symptoms of cognitive decline. Lucia Amoruso is one of the main authors of that study. She's a psychologist with the Basque Center on Cognition, Brain, and Language based in San Sebastian, Spain.
So what we found basically was that living in multilingual societies is linked with slower aging, so namely a slower cognitive and functional decline at the population level. And I'm stressing this because multilingualism was treated in our study as exposure in terms of the percentage of people speaking 1, 2, or more language at the country level. So what we found was exactly what you said, that speaking more than one language can help you to stay younger for longer, let's say.
What exactly does that mean, your brain staying healthier for longer? Can you give me some measurements here?
Yeah, what we found, actually, we didn't use brain measures, right? What we used for training our machine learning model were biobehavioral variables. So we took this information from national surveys, like measuring at the population level protective factors like preserved cognition or functional ability, so how independent you are in your daily life activities, and also risk factors, so unhealthy lifestyles, alcohol consumption, or if you have cardiometabolic diseases. And we enter all this information into our model that basically the model what is doing is learn to predict age. And you may have, 40 years old, but the model maybe says that based on your information, you have a cognitive profile of someone that is actually 60 years old. So you are like aging in an accelerated way. Or you can find the other way around. So you can have, 40 years old, but the model is predicting that you have 20 years old. So you are protected. You have delayed aging. And basically what we found was that multilingualism was linked to this, to delayed aging.
And so what kinds of things is your brain better at doing if you have delayed aging? What measurements were you looking at when you were looking at surveys of how people reported their own daily lives?
The thing is that when you are talking multiple languages and you want to communicate and to speak in one of those languages, you need to control the other ones because they are always active. So you need to inhibit them or control them to avoid these languages to come into the conversation. So by doing this, your brain is using executive functions, so inhibitory control, attentional control, and all these brain networks are actually those that decline with age. And it seems that multilingualism is boosting these networks.
Interesting. So your brain is very active, selecting the right word for what you're trying to say in the language you are speaking, and that kind of keeps your brain healthy because it's exercising in that way.
Yeah, it is also about engaging with others because obviously these situations don't come up when you are practicing Duolingo, let's say, because you are there with your phone, practicing alone and learning grammar rules. And it's not just about this. It has to do more with interacting also with others and putting you in these situations that actually required mental effort.
Is being, say, trilingual or being able to speak 4 languages better than being able to speak just 2?
Well, we found a dose effect in this study, so that the more the languages that you are speaking is the better, the huge the effect of the protection. But also, as I said before, we were controlling for many, many things. One of the things that we controlled for was immigration status. And what we found actually was that when you were speaking multiple languages, you are trilingual, let's say. But we control for immigration, the protective effect is disappearing. So this means that it's not just multilingualism. I mean, there are some other effects that might be at play. For instance, it's not the same if you move to another country because you get a better job position or because you're willing to do it. Or if you have to move because you need to, because, I don't know, in your country there are political conflicts or war conflict and you have to move because you don't have the choice. So in this condition, in this context, maybe there are some stress that is counteracting the effect of multilingualism.
Does it matter how different the languages are that one speaks? So if you just speak, 3 languages that are very, very different, is that more protective of brain health than if you speak, say, 2 Romance languages?
We have some preliminary findings in this direction, suggesting that the closer, the more similar the languages that you speak are, the greater the protective effect because of this cross-linguistic effect. So if you speak 2 similar languages, there's more cross-linguistic interference. So you need to use more these executive functions to control the other language, not to interfere with your message. You really need to use this attentional control and so on. So the hypothesis, right, is that you are boosting these brain networks and this is giving you much protection. But these are preliminary findings.
If you were designing, say, a public health initiative based on these findings, what would you design?
Well, I would really promote language learning from schools. I think this is a cheap, low-cost, and scalable way of promoting brain health in the future.
I'm curious, how many languages do you speak?
I speak 4 languages. I've been living in Italy, so I speak Italian, I speak Spanish, I try to speak in English, and I speak French.
So do you feel yourself trying to beat back those other languages in your brain when they're competing to get out of your mouth, as you've said, you think might be the mechanism here for protection?
Yeah, I really think there's something about that. And then when you speak languages that are very close, it's more exhausting for me. The mental effort that you have to do is much more than when languages are distant from each other in your brain.
So you said you learned most of these languages after you left school.
Yeah.
Can you give any encouragement to other adults who might be daunted by the idea of learning a new language a bit later in life?
Yeah, of course. For me, it's never too late. I mean, of course, our brains are much more plastic when we are kids, but brain plasticity is something that we have throughout our lives. And we are not losing this ability. So it's never too late for me to start learning new languages.
Lucia Amoruso of the Basque Center on Cognition, Brain and Language. We spoke earlier today.
The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston and from the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. You can find us online anytime at theworld.org. Also, check us out on YouTube. We've got more reporting there. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Join us right back here tomorrow.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. macfound.org. And by FJC, a foundation of philanthropic funds serving the nonprofit sector with donor-advised funds, fiscal sponsorship, bridge lending, and more. FJC.org. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX. More information at theworld.org.